So our next speaker is Vivek Mehta. He's the founder and CEO of Weeve. A bit more about Vivek. He's an entrepreneur passionate about increasing understanding and happiness at work. He's the founder and CEO of Weeve, a leading startup using empathetic AI to help people leaders engage their remote teams. Very relevant in today's world. Weeve has been recognized a number of times, most recently as a Mass Challenge top startup. Prior to Weeve, Vivek was a Deloitte consultant where he led global teams on $100 million projects for the Fortune 100. So really looking forward to this topic. And Vivek, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Julia. And if you could let me know when you can see my screen.
We can see it. Perfect.
I just got a very large new monitor, so I apologize. My face is going to be whatever color the slide is. I'm really fortunate that Anna went right before me because she went into depth on a lot of the topics that I'm going to touch on briefly. So having that background is going to be really nice. So I'm going to talk today about how to incorporate trust and empathy into employee feedback. I'm going to be touching on the concepts of what does it mean to bring empathy into work. Our approach to it at Weeve, but overall, I hope that you're able to kind of pull out the principles rather than just our specific approach. And then if we have time, I'll actually do a quick demo of our product. I think some of you will find it pretty interesting. As we all know, we're living in the new normal. There is this implicit understanding among senior leaders that employees have to feel safe, heard, and supported. In fact, since the start of the pandemic, 95% of senior leaders are demonstrating a sincere interest in employees' well-being and safety, and that's up from only 60% just last year, which means that we're at this forced business transformation. Like a lot of the points that touched on, companies are trying to figure out who's staying, who's going back to work. Right now, we don't know the answer to it, but we do know that up to 50 million jobs that are currently remote could continue to stay remote post the pandemic. And what that means is that there is this immediate need to build a continuous and two-way dialogue between employees and leaders, no matter where they both are. Now, when we're having those dialogues, how do we project a sense of safety, competence, and empowerment? Or in other words, how do we build remotely a culture of empathy? How do we engage every employee no matter where they are? And how do we build very rapid issue to action cycles? So starting with that first point, how do we build a culture of empathy and trust? And maybe even before that, what is trust? So Anna touched on this quite well, so I'm not going to go into it super in detail here, but we're also citing the trust barometer from Edelman. Put quite simply, from an individual's perspective, trust is when they have confidence in competence, that things are going to be done well, that they'll have an opportunity and chance to speak and voice their needs, and that things are going to be done right and ethically. We could even go the next step and say that empathy is one of the foundations of trust. But empathy is not a program that we can roll out. It is a value that has to permeate from leadership to HR to management down to employees. And there has to be a clear narrative that we build with the unified voice, no matter where that message is coming from. Now, I know this sounds a little bit like a platitude, so let's get more specific. At Weeve, we see empathy as four distinct things. First, someone cares enough to ask for my thoughts. Second, they demonstrate that they have understood my thoughts by the follow-up questions that they're asking me or how they're responsive. Next, I'm kept in the loop with what is being done with my feedback, whether that is just processing it, whether it's actually taking action and next steps on it. The process is not a black box to me. And finally, it's not a one-off engagement, but an ongoing conversation, meaning an employee shouldn't feel that if they miss their chance to give you their thoughts and feedback this one time, it's gone. They're not going to get another chance for the next year. Instead, they should know that this is continuous and they're going to have the chance again. In the workplace, what we see empathy as meaning is that companies are communicating frequently and openly, keeping employees informed on not only what's going well, but what's not going well. That direct managers are showing sincere care for their employees. Rather than just messaging coming purely from the leadership level, the most important from an employee's point of view is what the person they're interacting with day to day is treating them like. And finally, employees trust that the feedback process is going to actually enact change. That every single employee believes that their voice is being heard. So how do we ensure that we're hearing the voice of every employee? We recently ran a survey with 350 people leaders from 350 different companies to understand the state of remote work. And one of the very interesting things we found from there is that managers are on average spending 29 hours a week just in communications with their employees. That's being on Zoom, that's instant messaging, that's emails. But the bulk of their time is being spent in communication and not on other aspects of their job. This tells us a couple of things. One is that this method of interacting with employees, while ideally every single interaction could be face-to-face and one-on-one, it's unscalable. It's becoming increasingly more difficult with the shift to remote work. And very clearly, it's risking burnout of people leaders. We believe instead that manager face-to-face time with employees should be spent on the conversations that matter the most. And then a lot of this time that's being spent is in extraneous communication that doesn't need to be handled directly. So an approach that a lot of companies take in trying to solve for these issues is surveys. And we think surveys are great for large scale metrics. We don't think they're so good for very quick turnaround on employee feedback into action. So for a couple of reasons, we see that employees tend to distrust survey processes. The surveys themselves are often not specific enough to that employee's direct needs at that time. And there's a lack of actionable steps for managers to really improve the issues of their teams. Now, there's a wide range of employee engagement products, and I won't go too into that now, where some do a much, much better job at this than others. But our general premise here is that purely relying on surveys is not enough to build an effective feedback cycle. So before I go into kind of our process, I want to touch on some of the best practices that we've learned. And the first of that is that every single question that you ask has to matter. It has to have immediate relevance to the employee at that time. And more importantly, employees should understand how participating in the feedback process is going to directly impact them and directly have impact on the issue that matters to them. Second, a big issue that we see in feedback processes at very large organizations is extremely cumbersome feedback cycles, where we see HR running a survey, they're collecting the results, they analyze it, they present it to executives, action plans are created, it disseminates down to managers, and finally, an employee sees an action. What that means is that these feedback cycles can take from 6 months to 1.5 years. And from an employee's perspective, they lose trust because they no longer believe in the competence of the process. What we recommend is very fast cycles that are more centered on individual teams. So direct managers understanding the needs of their direct reportees and cutting out that full cycle, except for when you're collecting organizational-wide metrics. We take a pretty aggressive stance on this. We believe that employee feedback should be responded to within 2 days of hearing it, and that employees need to either be fixed, issues need to either be fixed or at least communicated that they're in the process of being addressed within 2 weeks of a report. For some companies, they may see, oh, that's nothing, we turn things around in less than a day. Other companies may think that this is extremely aggressive. And for those of you for which this feels very fast, what we've found to be most effective in accelerating the timelines, other than making feedback cycles very team-based and cutting bureaucracy, is to engage employees more. Engage employees in the solution building process, crowdsource suggestions from them, which will not only help kick off action planning faster, but it's going to make employees feel that they're more involved in the process, removing the black box, and also getting you suggestions that are probably going to work. So what are the things that we should actually be talking about? It's kind of a difficult question to answer because employee needs are extremely rapidly changing, especially right now as the pandemic evolves, as the culture shift to remote work evolves. We're seeing very fast changes. So a couple of examples: in April, job security was the #1 employee issue. In May, that became work and life balance. Job security was no longer even on the top 6 issues. As of our state of the remote work survey that we did last month, the top issues among employees are anxieties and distractions at home. All in all, what this tells us is that we're at a very pivotal point where the employee interaction experience has dramatically changed. Remote work is here to stay, at least for a portion of us, which means that we need a way to overcome challenges that didn't exist when we could just grab a conference room. Which is why we created Weeve. Weeve is the first employee engagement platform built with what we call empathetic AI. It's built on the premise that having organic conversations is the way to engage with employees and build a true feedback process. And it'd be great if we could have that face-to-face conversation with every employee. And that might be possible if you're at a small enough organization. But how do we have those conversations at scale? How do we have them with our distributed workforces? And how do we make that entire process continuous? At Weeve, we do that through Kim. Kim is a always available chatbot. She has organic conversation with employees to understand their issues and needs. She lives on the company's messaging channel, so it's as easy as DMing her on Microsoft Teams or Slack or even SMS, email, etc. What we found is that we can create a very unique space by giving a combination of anonymity plus empathy, which results in very, very candid feedback. For certain demographics of employee groups, they really take to this, where they feel that Kim is like a friend, that they can talk transparently because they feel that they're not being judged and that they can be open with confidence. Now, there's 2 main ways that an employee chats with Kim, and whether or not you're using a product like ours, we recommend that you have these kinds of communication pipelines. The first is a always available resource for employees to reach out whenever they want to escalate a critical issue. But more commonly in our feedback processes, we are wanting to proactively reach out and pulse employee sentiment on particular topic areas. At Weeve, we handle 50 to 100 some odd key remote employee business continuity type use cases. And if we have a chance, Julie, I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, but if I've got 2 minutes, I'd love to actually show what an interaction with that bot looks like.
Yeah, for sure. Go for it.
Awesome. Are you able to see my chat screen?
Yep.
Perfect. So hopefully this is something that some of y'all will find interesting. I'm right now playing the role of an employee that has chatted with Kim, the chatbot, a couple of times in the past. I know who she is, why she's reaching out. In this case, she's pinging me to get my thoughts on the project that ended last week. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in this conversation. She's asking, do I feel like I had influence over the decisions made during the project? So I'm going to say something like, I really felt like my ideas were ignored. My spelling mistakes and whatnot get fixed up in the back end. But what we're really doing is using natural language processing to ask the right follow-up questions and really dive into the root of the employee issue. In this case, Kim wants to know if this is a trend that I'm seeing at my company. So I'm going to say, yes, some of us need to keep improving ourselves. The rest have it. Now, what we're also doing is using a couple forms of sentiment analysis combined with emotional analysis. In this case, Kim recognizes that this is something I'm frustrated with. She wants to empathize with me, let me know that it's an area that's being worked on and that my thoughts are going to be passed along. Now she's asking if there's anyone on my team that's shown an interest in my career progression. Let's say, not really, doesn't have much In this case, what we do is we can actually hand off to other systems that are available in the organization. In this case, this company has a mentorship program. And when they recognize in real time that I don't have that access immediately in my team, we can actually route someone to that resource. Now, the last thing I want to quickly show you for time's sake is how do we handle things that the bot shouldn't handle, that should be handled by a human. So if I was to say something like I'm being bullied or there's a harassment issue or something to that nature, those are things that we'll flag for and immediately put up into an escalation flow so that a human can handle them. Now, this is just an example of a conversation. We may have a few more questions in a real interaction, but it usually never takes more than 2 minutes of an employee's time. And what we'll do is spit out that data in the form of emotional insights, topic analysis, sentiment analysis. But the biggest takeaway that I'd like to give is that those analytics alone, no matter what tool you're using, aren't equating to real improvement in employees' eyes. And what we need to be doing is creating a very clear path for leaders to get to improvement. That path starts with having conversations with employees to understand their issues, then being responsive to those issues, broadcasting, hey, this is what we're doing, or in cases where you don't know what steps to take, engage employees in that crowdsourcing. Show them that the process is transparent, but also help your leaders in kicking off their own action planning. And finally, continue to engage so that the impression from an employee is that if I involve myself in the feedback process, I'm going to see timely response to my issues. And from a leader's perspective, their feeling towards the process should be, if I engage in the feedback process, I'm never going to have to ask what's next. The next steps are always very clear to me. Now, this is a process that we run via Kim at Weave, but it's a takeaway that we believe every organization should be doing at the team level. I'm not sure where I am on time, but I'll go ahead and stop there and see if there's any questions.